In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. What that verse is saying there is exactly literally true. Take it as it reads, you can't go wrong. It's as simple as that. In the world today, there's 4 or 5 English Bibles that we could call reputable, that come from uncorrupted manuscripts. We'll go through them as we go along. I'll show them to you. And these are what I call, if you're doing a Bible study, these are the editions, the revisions and editions you want to use. And even though there's corrupted Bibles out there, you can still get truth from those as well, of course. But you do have to look out for little points of deletions or additions that can mislead. So as long as you're awake, you can still arrive at truth if you wish. But with the uncorrupted manuscripts, you have a far better chance of not only doing that, but not being led astray. I'm using the King James, except for when I note a different version. And in Proverbs 27:6, where there's these wonderful verses, faithful are the wounds of a friend, but the kisses of an enemy are deceitful. My prayer today, friends, is that what we share will wound, not only wound, but wound deeply. And I mean deeply. Not because I want to hurt anyone, but because I want the truth to do the damage it's got to do, convict you and bring you into the truth. In Psalms, there's 2 principles I want to bring out before we go into the study. Psalms 33:6 says that by the word of the Lord were the heavens made, and all the host of them by the breath of his mouth. For he spake and it was done, he commanded and it stood fast. The water and what's around it is not stated. But I want you to see from this word that really everything the Lord made came from his word. So even where it's not stated, you could understand from the very beginning, everything that we know of, everything, doesn't matter where it is or what it does, was all created by the Lord, by the breath of his mouth and by the word of his testimony. Notice that the word heavens in Psalms 33:6 is the word shamayim. There's a definition for it. It's heaven, heavens, sky, visible heaven, sky, the abode of the stars as a visible universe, the sky and atmosphere. There are places where that word can include the firmament as well. But that's the general and common definition of the word. We're told in Exodus 20 verse 11 that in 6 days, this is important, in 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth. The heaven there is shamayim. He made the heaven and the earth, the sea and all that in them is. All that in them is extremely important. There's nothing in the creation account of the 6 days that was not made by God. And it all happened in 6 days. So whatever question you want to direct at, when did God do a certain part of creation? When did he make it or create it? Has to be answered within the 6 days. It has to be. Because here we're told all that in them is. And in Genesis 2, the beginning of the chapter, we have a very clear summary of what Genesis 1 has just expounded. We're told that thus the heavens and the earth were finished and all the host of them. And on the 7th day, God ended his work which he had made and rested on the 7th day from all his work which he had made. Please take note in verse 1, the word thus. The word thus is what makes this a summary. And what's following it is a summary of these 6 days. But notice the length that the Lord goes to inspire these verses. In verse 1, he says all the host of them. In verse 2, he says from all his work which he had made. And verse 3, from all his work which God had created and made. He's repeated it 3 times in 3 verses. So he really wants you to get this point. Everything, and I'm sure nobody would disagree with this at this point. Everything that God made, he made in 6 days. Everything. And these are the generations of the heavens and the earth when they were created in the day that the Lord God made heaven and earth. We see here the spirit prophecy, the testimony of Jesus, repeats the same words clearly. So we've got these in English. You don't have to worry about translations here. I was then carried back to the creation. So this is a vision that the messenger of the Lord is having. And she says that it was shown that the first week in which God performed the work of creation was done in 6 days. A confirmation of what we just read. So there's no disputing or there's no ambiguity here of the 6-day creation week. These are the generations of the heavens and of the earth when they were created. And then we're told this: God gives us the productions of his work at the close of each literal day. You look at Genesis chapter 1 carefully, friends, 31 verses. You're going to see 6 separations, 6. That's all you're going to see from the writing. I'm not talking about the verse divisions that man has made. We'll look at those in a little while. But there's 6 parts in Genesis 1. Each one deals with one day, from day 1 to day 6. And I'm going to remind you of this throughout the talk. Each day was accounted of him a generation, because every day he generated or produced some portion of his work. But it's at the end of the day that the verses preceding are what he produced on that day. In the King James Bible, the verses are set out this way, as you can see on the screen. Verse 1 and 2, that there's a gap between verse 2 and verse 3. This is where people try to use or bring in the gap theory. And then there's a separate start to the work God is doing in verse 3. I'll just show you a picture of my Bible. You'll notice there, the words are crossed out the first day, but you can still see them. That's how it appears in my Bible. And many Bibles are like this, because gap theory has been around quite a while. That subheading is put there by man. It's not inspired, so you can pay no attention to it. The gap theory is between verses 2 and 3, as you can see on this slide. But the summary theory proponents, they place a gap or a break in the order of creation between verse 1 and verse 2. Whichever way you want to call it, gap, break or heading, that's where they make a distinction between the beginning of creation and a summary in the first verse. And I'll first of all show you where this comes from, and then we'll talk about it. Notice at the bottom of the slide, the gap theory author was Thomas Chalmers. It came in 1814 by this man. He was a Freemason. I mean, we don't have to say much more, do we? The fellow's a Freemason. He's not for Christianity. Freemasonry is an institution set up to appear as a Protestant denomination when it's a papal institution against the Word of God. That's what it is in summary. The summary theory was introduced by a fellow by the name of George Bush in 1852. From everything I've researched in these past few months, I believe that the summary theory was brought in to entrap and ensnare those who did not accept the gap theory. That's what I personally believe. Now, that's just an opinion. You don't have to put any weight on that. But what I'm going to share with you today is going to lend you to understand that it's a very plausible opinion and conclusion. This fellow, George Bush, I just want to read you a little bit about this fellow. 1852. He only lived 63 years. He died pretty young. He was a very notable theologian and Bible scholar, and a lot of people praise his work. It was in 1844 that he published a monthly magazine called Hierophant, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, devoted to the elucidation, that is, the clarity of scriptural prophecies. That was his main work. And he issued in New York a work entitled Anastasis, in which he opposed the doctrine of the literal resurrection of the body. Now, this man had a good reputation, but you know what? As soon as I saw that he's denying the resurrection, and I haven't read his book, by the way, but this is summary, and there's a few places where it's noted, I thought to myself, this is very questionable. If there's one doctrine in the Bible you don't want to touch, it's the resurrection of Christ, which makes possible the resurrection of the saints, because without that we have no hope. So that's the last doctrine you want to get wrong. In 1844, Anastasis primarily referred to a book entitled Anastasis, or The Doctrine of the Resurrection of the Body. So I'm not sure what spin he puts on it, but it's obviously not correct. Published by the Society for the Promotion of Collegiate and Theological Education. Additionally, Anastasis is also used in art and religious context to refer to the image of Christ's resurrection, also known as a descent into limbo. Those words, Lord, to me, friends, they ring right through papal heresy. When we start talking about limbo, that's one word we don't want to use in our vocabulary. In the context of the Great Disappointment in 1844, Anastasis is not directly mentioned, though the Adventists were expecting the return of Jesus and the events of that year paved the way for the formation of the Seventh-day Adventist Church. Friends, in 1844, I want you to know, the beginning of the real movement, the real push of the New Age movement, of the JWs, and a number of other institutions which were all to combat what God was trying to do through the Seventh-day Adventist movement. That's what they were all for. That this man appears at that time, it doesn't surprise me at all. I'll get back to the study now. I just sidelined. I just wanted to make that point. It's worth noting. Please look him up and do your own research. If we look at chapter and verse divisions in the English Bible, they were first introduced with the Geneva Bible of 1560. The divisions were made by a fellow by the name of Stephen Langton, and the verse divisions by Robert Estienne and the Ben Asher family. Now, I don't know anything about them, good or bad, but I don't doubt for a moment that they tried to do a good work, and I believe it's a needed work. I mean, when we do Bible studies, it's good to be able to pinpoint a verse or a chapter in the Bible to help others with, or even for our own reference. So I'm not saying anything against it. But I want you to see something. You notice the first 5 verses at the top of the slide. They're the first 5 verses of Genesis. The punctuation, the capitals and full stops have been taken out. It can be read as one statement, one passage, one sentence. You can put a full stop at the end because that's where the first day ends. The evening and the morning were the first day. Remember what we read from the messenger of the Lord. God gives us the productions of his work at the close of each literal day. Now look at this, friends. These people here that made their chapter and verse divisions, if they were alive today, I can assure you the divisions would not have been the way they are now. I'll give you a perfect example. Daniel chapter 11 verse 45 and Daniel chapter 12 verse 1. There is no way in the world there should be a division between those 2 verses in chapter or verse. They are continuing one after the other. The issue of the king of the north brought that out plainly. And if these fellows were alive, they would not have done it that way. Now, I'm not saying that they're bad. That's the best they knew. And in their day, it was fine. It was okay to do it that way. Why? Because there was no issue. In 1560, it was not an issue. That's an issue today. And the reason I point that out is this, that the issue that we're dealing with today, in the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth, would not have, these 5 verses would not have the verse divisions that we see in our King James Bible today. There's nothing wrong with the Bible and the words. I haven't changed any words. But look at this format. This is my format. Just my opinion. It's worth nothing, but look at what it says. The only phrase, the only verse in this passage here, which is different to all the others, is the first phrase, in the beginning God created the heaven and the earth. It starts with in the beginning. To me, that is perfectly sensible and perfectly correct because it's the beginning of a passage, the beginning of a narrative, the beginning of the account of creation. And every passage after it starts with the word and, every single one. That if you want to do away with that first and because it doesn't suit your theology, friends, you're totally out of context, totally. The passage shows you plainly, when it's divided up this way, that every single and there is adding to the passage before it. In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth was without form and void, a description of the first verse. And darkness was upon the face of the deep, a description of what was happening when the earth was without form and void, and so on, right to the very end. So this is the passage we're dealing with today. God gives us the productions of his work at the close of each literal day. That's inspired. Now, I want to ask you the first question to start to test your honesty. Does the Bible here say, in the second verse, does it say that there was a time when the earth was without form and void? This is a question I want you to answer. Answer it honestly. Don't condemn yourself. Without understanding even at this point what form and void is, what it means, and without understanding when this time was, even if you don't take that into account, does the Bible say there was a time when the earth was without form and void? Does it say it? Yes or no? It's a simple question. I'm not asking you to define what form and void is. I'm not asking you to tell me when this time was. I'm not even asking that. All I'm asking is, was there a time when the earth was without form and void? I think the answer is clear, it's simple. See the word was? The word was is past tense. There was a time when the earth was without form and void. If we look at those verses from verse 1 to 5, the last verse says, in the evening and the morning were the first day. If we are to draw a mental picture of what those verses have said to us, you're going to get something like this. I don't say this is perfect, but it'll be similar to this. The slide you're looking at now, a rectangular shape of the slide, which you want to disregard because we don't know the shape of the watery mass at the end of first day. There was a watery mass. That's what we conclude with on the first day of creation. There is some light because God created light, verse 3 and 4. But all there is water, deep. And the deeper it gets, the darker it gets. That's what we have at the end of the first day. You can see the slide, so you know what I'm illustrating. The point I want you to take from this is simple. Look, the end of the first day, this is roughly what you see, a mass of water. There's a little light on top, some light, whatever amount, I'm not sure, but there's just a watery mass. That's a picture you get of the end of the first day. If we go to day 2, and I want to point out something else here on day 2. God said, let there be a firmament. The word for firmament there is rakia. It means firmament, that's all it means, rakia. That visible dome or arch, the solid structure up in the sky that separates the waters from above from the waters from below. So God says, let there be a firmament, a rakia, in the midst of the waters, and let it divide the waters from the waters. And right through this passage, the rakia is in every word of firmament, it's rakia. Not until verse 8, when the rakia is formed, does God call it a heaven. Not until then. This is the first time rakia is called shamayim. That's the first time. So prior to this, you cannot call the firmament shamayim. You can't do it. It'd be like saying, when I was born and my parents named me, could you call me Tom before my parents named me? Can't do it. I wasn't named yet. Anything that has a title or a name cannot be called that until it's given the name. After my parents called me Tom, you can call me Tom. That's my name. And it's the same here with rakia and shamayim. This is important, and I'll point it out in a little while. But I just want you to see it now. If we draw a mental picture of this passage here, which is the second day, you're going to get something like this. This is an elevation. It's only an illustration. But what you're going to see is an arch. You're going to see the visible water above and below, and the space in between, which is shamayim. There's light, and you can see the water. This is roughly an illustration. Here's a question to get you thinking, because some of you will probably already know where I'm going. Can anyone see some form here? Some shape or design, some style, some structure, anything at all, whichever way you want to describe it. Is there something here that was not here? Can you see a difference? I certainly can. When we move to day 3, this is an important day in the study also. God said, let the waters under the heaven be gathered together unto one place, and let the dry land appear. And it was so. There's one theologian who I'm going to give you a link for his material because it's just so good. I think everyone should have a look at it. And he says this, moreover, as we learn from verse 9, a solid entity is already present underneath the liquid like deep. Verse 9 does not say that God made or created the dry land alongside the waters. And he's just made a very important statement. Look at the verse and tell me if he's right or wrong. He tests your honesty. He said, verse 9 does not say that God made or created the dry land alongside the waters. There's verse 9, friends. It's in front of your eyes. Is he correct or is he wrong? I'm using his words because these people have much better grammar than I. So I want you to get it as clearly as possible. Neither does it say that God caused the dry land to be congealed out of the waters. It doesn't say that either. Rather, the waters were gathered together so that the dry land might appear. This description implies that the solid material already existed underneath. That's the mass that was in the water from day 1. This is his conclusion, and it's a correct one. So if so, presumably it already existed in verse 2. So if we can understand and believe from this reasoning, if this makes sense to you, the matter which was used for the firmament, for the heaven and for the earth, it was already there on day one. It was already there. I'm going to show it to you a lot more clearly, but I just want you to pick up on the reasoning now. The King James, the Revised Version, the Young's Literal, that's there because of the literal translation. The Lamsa Bible, which we're going to look at more closely in a moment. The Peshitta and Geneva Study Bible, they're all good Bibles, friends, all of them. They're all reputable Bibles. And I won't even say that there's no error at all in any of them, no. But these are the best English Bibles we have, all of them. Notice what they all say. Be gathered together, be gathered together, be collected unto one place, be gathered together. The waters shall be gathered that are lower than the heaven. Be gathered together unto one place. They all say the same thing. They all say the same word gathered, and we'll look at the meaning of it. There's no way you can say that the earth was created on day 3, because the reason that the earth was seen, the reason why the earth appeared, as the verse says, is because the waters were moved, not the earth. The earth was stationary and fixed, just like Psalms 33 told us. The waters were moved out of the way somehow. God did that. And there you go, you've got the earth, the dry land. That's what the verse is saying, simply and plainly. To contradict that would be very wrong. There's a picture, an illustration of how it would have appeared, something like this. You've got the dry land appearing on top. You can see some water. The pillars are underneath. This is important also because of this reason. Anyone ever seen a mountain floating around in the water or in the sky? I haven't. And I'm not trying to be funny. All mountains are fixed to the earth, all of them. Every mountain I know of. I'm not talking about icebergs floating around in the water. I'm talking about mountains, rock, solid matter. It's all fixed to the earth. And the earth is supported by the pillars. So when we read a description about these mountains, remember they're fixed to the earth. And I'll remind you of that in a second. Day 4. And God said, let there be lights in the firmament of the heaven to divide the day from the night, and let there be signs, seasons for days and years. We know the rest of the verses. This is a beautiful day. There's the illustration of day 4. Can everyone see a lot of form, feature, a lot of design, style, structure? Can you see it? There's landscape, there's lights, there's everything. Would anyone in their wildest imagination say this is without form and void? I certainly wouldn't say that. Plenty of form here, if you ask me, regardless of what you want to make of that verse, of that word, and we're going to look at that more carefully. But you can see a lot of form here. Here's the next challenging question for you, friends. What day was the earth without form and void? Just from a simple analysis of the pictures we drew from those verses. God gives us the productions of his work at the close of each day. So at the close of each day, we have a mental picture. Even without understanding those words, wouldn't this, day 1, the blue mass of water, wouldn't this be the one day that you would pick as being without form, without structure, without design or style? It's certainly not this one. That's day 2. It can't be that one, because you can see God did something on day 2. It's there. Something is there, but not on day 1. So what day was the earth without form and void? It's very simple, friends. It's day 1. It's simple. You can't get simpler than this. A simple rendering of the verses, if you take them literally, if you take them as they read. The reason I shared with you about the mountains being fixed to the earth is this. One verse proves what I was saying very, very simply. Psalms 104, 2 verses, I should say, verse 5 and 6. Who laid the foundations of the earth? When were the foundations laid, friend? Beginning of creation, the very beginning. Whichever day you want to place it in, it's the beginning of creation. That's when the foundations of this earth were laid, that it should not be removed forever. You can't move a mountain, friends. You can't move a mountain. It's fixed to the earth. It's solid rock. And then the Lord goes to the trouble to tell us that this deep water, that mass we saw on day 1, it was covered like a garment, and the water stood above the mountains. I don't know how anyone can go against this. This is so simple and plain. There was a time when the waters covered the mountains. There was a time. You can take that all the way up to day 3 if you wish, until the waters were gathered, the seas, and the earth appeared, and the mountains appeared, you can take it. But when was it created, friends? When was it there? Which was the only day without form and void, when the foundation of the earth was laid? Day one, friends. You can't get out of it. It's day one. Day two describes the firmament. Doesn't describe the mountains and the earth. Describes the firmament. Day one is when that was put in place. The simple reasoning. There's a picture again of day 4. There's day 2, plenty of form. And there's day 1. In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. What that verse is saying there is exactly literally true. Take it as it reads, you can't go wrong. It's as simple as that. But we're going to prove it now in the next slide. When God gives a sequence, a perfect sequence, you can read it forward, backwards, whichever way you want. And if you ask the right question, you'll always come up with the truth. So it's not difficult to understand. And we're going to do that with this slide here. Those same divisions that I made from verse 1 to verse 5 in the King James are laid out like this. The reason, just so you know, the reason I have the 7th verse, all 3 phrases, is because it's all dealing with light, all of it. Now look at this, friends, and please pay close attention, because you can pick me up if I'm wrong, you can challenge this. In line 8, we're told that the evening and the morning were the first day. The question and issue we're dealing with today is when? When was the earth created? When? So let's ask the question in the passage. When was the evening and the morning the first day? When? Go to line 7. When God divided the light from the darkness and called the light day, and the darkness he called night, that's when that first day was proclaimed. That's when the evening and the morning were the first day, when he divided the light, because that's what made night and day, or evening and morning. So when did God divide the light from the darkness? You go to line 6. And God saw the light that it was good. When God saw the light was good, he proclaimed and he divided the light, when he proclaimed it was good. When did God see that the light was good? Go to line 5. When God said, let there be light, that's when he said it was good. After he made it, he said, this is good. When did God say, let there be light? When the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters, line 4. That's when God said, let there be light. When the Spirit of God was moving on the face of the waters. And when was the Spirit of God moving upon the face of the waters? When darkness was upon the face of the deep. That's when it was. When was darkness upon the face of the deep? When the earth was without form and void. That's when. The verse tells you, that's verse 2 and 3, you can't get it wrong. When the earth was without form and void, there was darkness upon the face of the deep. So the last question that will really challenge you, if you don't want to break the sequence, if you don't want to disturb what God has given in his providence, when was the earth without form and void? When? There's only one verse before it. It's the beginning of the Bible. It's the only conclusion that you can draw. When? In the beginning, when God created the heaven and the earth, that's when the earth was without form and void. Now, friends, in case you haven't picked it, if you can agree with me on this reasoning, which is perfectly sound, because you have to do violence to the word of God to change what I just told you. Because you can read it forward, it says exactly the same thing. But you know what we've just done, friends? If you accept this perfect reasoning, you've just destroyed the summary theory. How? Very simple. Because if God created the heaven and the earth in the first verse, then it's not a summary. It's as simple as that. If it's a summary, then God did not create it on that day. But I just asked you the very relevant question, when? When was the earth without form and void? It can only be the preceding verse. It can't be anything else, because it's giving you a time. And now you can understand why those word ands, the conjunctions, now you can understand why they're so important. Because they're adding to each phrase, one after the other. And that's why, if these Bible translators and the verse and chapter division people, if they were alive today and knew this issue that's going on right now, this is how they do it. This is how the verses were read. I've changed no words. You can check them for yourself. All I've done is arrange them in the order that explains the truth and the passage more clearly. That's all I've done. I'll just share a short testimony. I really need to do this. When I embarked upon the study, the first thing I did, I prayed and asked the Lord to show me what the truth was. That's all. And I prayed the prayer that I only prayed this a few times in my life. It's an important prayer. It's never let me down yet. And I said, Lord, if I'm wrong, just show me. And if I'm wrong, I'll stand for the truth, whatever it is. I already had an opinion, that's true. I already had a position, but I wanted to make sure I wasn't wrong because I don't trust myself. And I went and looked at all the arguments. I looked at the verses. I looked at the meanings. I did all the research I could to prove the truth. And as soon as I proved it, I said, okay, thank you, Lord. He answered my prayer. And then I said, the next prayer was, Lord, I just need a way to show the people this in a simple way, like a simple manner that a child can understand. And that's where this slide came from, friends, from that prayer. This is a very simple way to understand this passage. You can't get simpler than this. One phrase follows the next, one verse after the other, and it leads you to a conclusion of the first day. But you can't separate them. You can't do that, the verses. But when I got to this point, and I realised this was a very simple explanation, then I prayed another prayer, and I asked the Lord if he would show me this from inspiration. Because I don't want people to think this is my opinion. This was something that I came up with. No, I want you to see it from inspiration. So at that point, I'm sitting in the doctor's surgery. I'm there 10, 12 hours a day, and I've got nothing else to do but research. It's the first time in my life I've been in that position. And I really question, and I ask the Lord now, why did I find myself in that position? And I think I know the answer. But I did 2 searches after the prayer, 2. The first search brought up nothing. The words I typed in gave me 0 results. It only took a few seconds. And then I type in without form and void, and I type in the word when, within 9 words, where those words appear within 9 words. And the Lord gave me this. It appears 3 times in the Spirit prophecy. Now look at this carefully, friends, so you'll know this is not from me. This is the message of the Lord. She quotes Genesis 1, 2 and 3. The only difference from those 2 verses, she puts the word when in front of it. When is a question. Look at what it does. All she does is add the word when, which is exactly the point the Lord had already showed me. She says, when the earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep, at that time, the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters. That's verse 2. She connects it with verse 3 and she says, so when the earth was like this, without form and void, at that time, God said, let there be light, and there was light. That's exactly what we saw in the last slide. When did God say, let there be light? When the earth was without form and void. But she asked the question, when? This is very, very important, friends. Don't miss this point. She's connecting verse 2 and 3, isn't she? You can see it plainly. Go and check it for yourself. Now understand this. The summary proponents, they put a division between verse 1 and 2. They don't separate verse 2 from 3. They don't do that. They only separate verse 1. Sister White here is telling you that verse 2 and 3 belong together, and they tell you when the earth was without form and void. Again, we come back to this conclusion. The only time that could be was verse 1, because that's the only verse that precedes the passage. It is that simple. There is no other verse prior to that but verse 1, Genesis 1:1. So you can see from this, the question she asked is exactly what the Lord showed me prior to me seeing this, okay? Because this came after I wanted confirmation. And I know my testimony may not mean anything to you, but I'll tell you this, friends. When this happened to me, you wouldn't believe how joyful I was. I didn't know this statement existed. And I thank God for weeks, not days, for weeks, that he gave me exactly what I asked for, and that sealed me. That sealed me in a way. There's no way in the world I will ever turn from this, because I know how the Lord gave it to me. And then it gets worse. Or maybe I should say then it gets better. It was towards the end of my time at the doctor's. I come back home and I talk to Bill and I ask him about this passage, and he tells me that that's what he shared in his talk in Genesis, the same principle of how the days came about. In his talk in Genesis, creation, Revelation, recreation. And I'd forgotten that. He did actually say, I went back to look at it, And I actually looked at the wrong sermon. I was looking at part 1. I was looking at part 2 and I should have been looking at part 1. And I only saw that on Wednesday this week. It's the first time I saw that after Bill presented it, and that was probably a few months ago. That same week, friends, Chris puts out a newsletter with that same principle, when the earth was without form and void. And I couldn't believe my eyes when I saw it because of what I'd just been through. And I said to Chris, what inspired you to write that? Where did it come from? Did someone show you that? Or, I just wanted to know what brought it about. He said, no, he felt impressed to place it that way. So I come home from the doctors, friends, with what I thought was incredible light, which no one had seen, because I looked at so many studies, you wouldn't believe how many studies I looked at in 5 weeks. I come home, and what I thought was unique, that God gave me independently and solely, my brother had already reiterated in his study, and you can go and see it. And Chris confirms it at the end of the same week. I mean, when God wants to confirm something to you, friends, he leaves no doubt. There's no doubt in my mind, none whatsoever. And that's why I can't walk away from it. So when the earth was without form and void can only be the verse preceding. And if you read it forward, in the beginning God created the heaven and the earth was without form and void. And I want to show you this now in another study, just to show you that these two words, and the earth, they go together. They're back to back. The end of verse 1 and the beginning of verse 2, and the earth was without form and void. They go together. You can't separate them. That's why you cannot separate verse 1 from 2. That destroys a summary theory on its own. We'll look at that passage more clearly in a moment. It's at that time that God laid the foundation of the earth and that the water stood above the mountains. That's the only time we know of that the waters could be above the mountains. One other question that should be asked at this point is, in the beginning, the first words in the Bible, that's Bereshit or Reshit, Hebrew words. What are they referring to, friends, in the beginning? It comes at the very beginning of the passage. Those little words that you probably can't read, that's Genesis chapter 1, from verse 2 to verse 31. It's a whole chapter. So in one simple word, here's a really simple question for you. What is Genesis chapter 1 dealing with, friends? You tell me. Creation. It's as simple as that. It's dealing with creation. Genesis 1:2 is dealing with the description of the beginning of that creation, the description of how God created the heaven and the earth. And in the beginning comes at the very beginning of verse 1, which is the very beginning, the beginning of the first day. That's when that beginning is. Beginning of creation, beginning of the 6 days of creation, beginning of the first day. You can, whichever one you want to say, it's correct. But it's a beginning. It's not the continuation or the process or the conclusion. It's a beginning, the very start. Look up the word in the beginning and see what it says. Chief, start, beginning point. It's a beginning. It's not the conclusion of the whole matter. See, the reason why that's important, friends, is because the summary theory that's been promoted takes in the whole 6 days. They say the beginning is 6 days. That's what they say. The beginning is 6 days. The beginning is not 6 days, friends. The beginning is the beginning of the very first day. If I was to say to you, with athletes, say the 100-metre dash, and I say to you, that fellow there, he was he's very quick at the beginning of the race. Am I referring to the whole race or just a beginning point? Some fellas are really quick off the mark. Some fellas are stronger, they finish at the end. They're very fast at the end. They're the ones that go on to win the 200-metre sprints, not the 100, because they're good at the end, not at the beginning. What about a marathon? 40 kilometres. If a fellow is good or slow, at fast or slow at the beginning, is that talking about 40 kilometres, is it? I don't think so, friends. This is common sense reasoning. That's why I appeal to your integrity to answer those questions correctly. When is the beginning? The passage tells you. Look at these explanations, which I believe are very, very sensible. In the first place, we have the evidence that the first day of time began in the evening. By the way, friends, this is E.J. Wagner. This is one of the brothers who received the most precious message that was ever going to go to the earth. This was in 1881, just prior to that message being given. He's just about in the prime of his ministry. He says, in the first place, we have the evidence that the first day of time began in the evening. That is, the dark portion of the day preceded the light portion. The evening and the morning were the first day, Genesis 1-5. That this was necessarily the case may be seen from the order of events in the creation. Time, as distinguished from eternity, commenced with the first creative act of God. The first act was bringing of the earth into existence, the very first act. You say this is just his opinion. Be careful. I'm going to show you from the Bible, friends. In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth, Genesis 1:1. He's taking it as it reads. He's not changing anything. He's not putting a spin on it. He's not making it a title, an introduction, or a summary. He's taking it as it reads. That this occupied but a brief space of time and not a long extended period is proved by the context also of Psalms 33:6. That's what we started with, that principle. By the word of the Lord were the heavens made, and all the hosts of them by the breath of his mouth. When was that, friends? There's only one verse in the whole Bible. There's only one that tells you that. Genesis 1:1. That's when the word of the Lord made the heavens and the earth. He spake and it was done, he commanded and stood fast. E.J. Wagner goes on to say, now we read the first verses of Genesis. In the beginning God created the heaven and the earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep. And the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters, and God said, let there be light, and there was light. God saw the light that it was good, and God divided the light from the darkness. And God called the light day, and the darkness he called night, and the evening and the morning were the first day. Okay, so we've read it a few times. We've got to read it a few more. Friends, look at the date, 1888. The prime of Wagner's ministry, the prime. There was never a time this fellow here was closer to God. Him and A.T. Jones, who we're going to read later. Never a time that they were closer to God than this point here. Here we have the work of the first day. What was it? It was the creation of the heaven and the earth, the creation of light and the separating of the light from the darkness, thus forming day and night. The measurement of time by days and nights must, of course, have begun as soon as time began. So in the beginning refers to the first day of the week of time in which the heaven and the earth were created. Friend, do you know what Jones and Wagner were most noted for, more than anything else? They had a way of explaining things that you just can't get wrong, friends. And they come at it with perspectives, all different angles. And when they prove a doctrine, they prove the most important doctrine that the Lord ever sent to this earth. When they prove a doctrine, it's uncontrovertible. You cannot go against it. It's too clear. Look at Geneva Bible study notes on the first and second verse of Genesis. Genesis 1:1. First of all, and before that any creature was, God made heaven and earth out of nothing. He made them of nothing. This is going to become very important in a few minutes. It says, as a rude lump and without any creature in it, the waters covered all. This is why Psalms 104 is so important. When you want to do a study line upon line, friends, don't leave out the verses that are most important. Psalms 104 is one of the most important verses you need to connect with Genesis 1:1. One of the most important verses. So when someone tells you they're doing a line upon the line study, make sure that verse is in there. Darkness covered the deep waters, for as yet the light was not created. You see that? The darkness was there and the waters were there. The truth was handed down unimpaired to the posterity of that holy line. Look at this. The order of creation, the object of the garden, the history of its two trees, so closely connected with man's destiny, were undisputed facts. Undisputed facts. They had it right. These people knew what was going on because they got it firsthand from Adam down the holy line. So the Geneva Bible plays a very important role and part in the doctrines. Because remember, as I shared in the beginning, the view I'm sharing with you today it's entitled and called the traditional view. Because it came down tradition through generations and centuries. It was never controverted until the cosmology question was being controverted. You notice that in the 1500s? Right? No wonder God inspired the Geneva Bible to set that record straight. There's the first day, friends. The heaven and the earth were in there somehow in some unformed mass and unperfected in a way that we can't understand or describe enough. I've got a lot more I want to share with Tohu and Bohu, but I'll bring it out in the chat. The Amplified Bible is a Bible that was based on various manuscripts. So I won't uphold it as uncorrupted or whatever, because there could be things in there that are not 100%. The ones below are the ones we've already looked at, which are all very reliable versions. But the reason I put the Amplified Bible in there is because it has this note. It says that Elohim, God, in the beginning created by forming from nothing the heavens and the earth. So important. I can see why the translators use the words forming from nothing. I'll share that in a minute. Young's literal uses the word preparing. I like that too, preparing. You know, if you're a tradesman, a craftsman, a service provider, before you do a job, you prepare your materials, you prepare what you've got to do, prepare the job site, prepare whatever it is, and then you go ahead and construct. The King James and the Geneva Bible, they use the word created, singular, not that this makes any difference. Whereas the Peshitta and the Revised Version, they use the word heavens, plural. It doesn't matter because we know the heavens, we know there's 3 heavens, so it's okay. It doesn't change the point I'm making. But what I want you to see from this is this. The Peshitta, which is the original classic Syriac, the Hebrew dialect, the Church of the East is the ancient church which developed in the regions of Assyria, Babylonia and Persia, that's today's Iraq and Western Iran, to the east of the Roman Byzantine Empire. It is an apostolic church established by the apostles Thomas, Thaddeus and Bartholomew. Look at this, friends. I want to show you something here that, to me, struck me. George Lamsa, he did a work in translating that Peshitta Bible, those original texts. Now, the Peshitta was in Hebrew and Aramaic. And this fellow, George Lamsa, he got the Aramaic Peshitta, the closest we had after the Apostolic movement. And he translated it into English. This wasn't done that long ago. See, August the 5th, 1892 to September 22, 1975 was his lifespan. He was born in this place, East Turkey. But more important than anything, he was an Aramaic, a native Aramaic speaker, native. He translated that Aramaic Peshitta, Old and New Testaments, into English. Now, I want to share a point with you, which before I show you what he did, which will help you to understand this point that I'm making. When we talk about the dialect, I understand that very well because in Italy and many European countries, every town or city, mainly towns, especially villages, wherever you go, there's a different dialect. It's based on the pure Italian, based on the pure language, but there's words they change completely, and you've got no idea what they're speaking about. Some dialects are so strong, you can't even relate it to Italian. It's that strong. The reason I know that firsthand, because I married into a family when I married, that was from the south of Italy. They spoke a dialect, and my sister's in the same boat. She married a southern Italian. And when we went into their families and we were speaking Italian, they were saying words we just had no idea of. We had to learn all over again. We were blessed to learn pure Italian at home, so that's what you would consider as the true Italian. But there's many, many versions. The reason I point that out is this. Depending on how those words are used, can change the meaning of them. Or they be different words altogether. So when we're talking about form and void, when we're talking about in the beginning, you need to go back and really study carefully what that dialect means, how they understood it, because they had the Aramaic-speaking natives. They knew exactly what the Bible was saying in Genesis 1 and 2. George Lamsa translates verse 1 like this for him. He says that God created the heavens and the earth in the very beginning. Would that make sense to you if he's speaking about 6 days? It wouldn't to me. No way. The very beginning, friends. The very beginning of what? The very beginning of creation. The very beginning of the first day. That's how George Lamsa. Now, you want to talk about languages and meanings and translations, friends. You're not going to do better than a native Aramaic speaker. You're not going to do better. And he used the best scripts available at the time to do it. That's what he's telling you. There's a meaning that we spoke about earlier from the Strong's Concordance. It talks about the first in place, time, order or rank, beginning and chief. You can't get it wrong, friends. By the word of the Lord were the heavens made on the very first day. Colossians 1:16 says, for by him were all things created. I'm going to share a few things about all things. This is important. That are in heaven and that are in the earth, visible and invisible. Now here I've just constructed my opinion, and you summary believers can perfect this and criticise it by all means. Make sure I'm not misquoting you. This is how a summary belief person would arrange Genesis 1:1 according to their theology, right? According to their theology. Thus, and I'm using the words of George Lamsa here, thus, in the very beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, the sun, moon and stars, and vegetation, and sea creatures, and land creatures, and man. And the reason I say that, I'm going to show it to you from their writings, because they understand the beginning to be 6 days. If you understand it to be 6 days, if that was the truth, then your summary would have to include these points. When the verse 1 says only the heaven and the earth, and it's talking about Shamayim, it's not talking about Rakia. When the verse says that, it's referring to only two things, the heaven and the earth. That's all it's referring to. It's not referring to these. So your summary has just failed you in its own manner of speaking. The summary does not bring out the ongoing creation of God during those 6 days. It doesn't do that. It only talks about the heaven and the earth. I hope that we're reasoning sensibly and intelligently. Look at what some commentators who speak better than I say. The traditional understanding of Genesis 1:1, in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth, originates from the Greek Septuagint, the first major translation of the Hebrew Bible into Greek, produced by Jewish scholars in the 3rd century BC. They take it right back to the 3rd century. I'm taking it back to Adam. This view, emphasising a creation out of nothing, has been a dominant interpretation among Jews and Christians throughout history. The Septuagint's translation of Genesis 1:1 has been the basis for the traditional interpretation which emphasises the absolute beginning of the universe and the creation of the heavens and the earth out of nothing. Now we're going to talk about this, the importance of this point that God created out of nothing, because I want to show you one of the main reasons why the summary theory and the gap theory were invented. Some interpretations view Genesis 1:2 as clarifying that the earth was initially in a state of tohu and bohu. Here they use the words unformed and unfilled, but it's the same words we read in Genesis 1 verse 2, without form and void, the same words, tohu and bohu. And this understanding, this further solidifies the idea of a creation out of nothing. And I'll show you why. Always remember Psalms 104. Don't let this verse escape your mind if you really want to consider all the points of what happened on day one. Commenting on this Psalms 104, verse 5 and 6, we've got 3 commentaries I want to just share. There's many more. There's another one I'll share after this. Ellicott's commentary says, the deep, this is what the water's covered, the deep. The water world is the first considered as vast as a garment wrapped around the earth. Okay, you guys are global believers. Yeah, on this point, friends, listen. I don't care whether you're a global believer or a flat earther. We're not discussing the shape of the earth today. So leave that right out of your argument. What we're discussing today is what God created on the first day. Whether it was a globe or a flat earth is not the issue. The issue is what he created on the first day. That's what we're discussing here. So this argument to show that because these men were globe believers, you've got to throw out everything they taught. These men lived their lives for the Lord, friends. They were wrong on some points, sure. There's many other doctrines they were wrong on too. But not on this one, not on this point. The water world is first considered as a vast garment wrapped around the earth so that the mountaintops are covered. That's what Psalms 104 is saying. But here, it is beyond its right, and the divine rebuke forces it to retire within narrower limits. Benson's commentary, thou covetest it with the deep. That is, in the first creation of which the psalmist is here speaking, when the earth, while yet without form, was covered all over. The earth was covered. It was there, but it was covered. As it were, clothed with the great deep, that vast expansion of air and waters. The water stood above the mountains. Barnes. The water stood above the mountains, above what are now mountains, and yet no dry land appeared. It seemed to be one wide waste of waters. That's how it looked. That's why our slide 1, the illustration, is so fitting. This does not refer to the deluge, that's the flood, but to the appearance of the earth at the time of creation, before the gathering of the waters into seas and oceans. At that stage in the work, all that appeared was a wide waste of waters. That's what our slide showed. That's exactly what the verse says. Charles Spurgeon, another commentator and Bible student, after the first verse, Genesis 1:1, it is of the earth and of the earth only that the narrative speaks. The earth did now exist, but in the form of chaos. That's the word tohu. Tohu, it can be translated chaos, it can be, but there's other meanings. But listen carefully to what he says. This expression does not mean a state of disorder or confusion, but that state of primitive matter in which no one element stood out in distinction from others. You see that? It was there, but it wasn't ordered yet. That's the word I prefer, because I understand how building jobs come together. That was my work. You go to the job site in your van or your truck, you've got all your materials with you. They're all there, you unload them all. They're not ordered yet. They're just there on the ground. You've got to go and get them and put them together. Then you've got order. But all the forces and the properties of matter existed, as it were, undivided. The materials were indeed all there, but not as such. They were latent. He uses this word latent. Look at what it means. Hid, concealed, secret, not seen, not visible or apparent. Why isn't this considered in the studies which are line upon line? Why don't you choose this word here, chaos, latent? Why don't you choose unordered? Why do you have to run with only one interpretation, which is obviously wrong? You've got to run with that one, but you won't consider the others? It means hidden or concealed. That's okay. That fits perfectly with the whole narrative. Genesis 1:2. And the earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters. Charles Spurgeon says, we cannot tell how the Spirit of God brooded over that vast watery mass. It is a mystery, but it is also a fact. And it is here revealed as having happened at the very commencement of the creation, the very beginning, as George Lamsa puts it. Even before God had said, let there be light. It was there, friends. It was there, all right. Of that there's no doubt. If you take the verses as they read. The Geneva Study Bible again. First of all and before any creature was, God made heaven and earth out of nothing. And the earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters as an unformed lump, and without any creature in it, for the waters covered everything. They've all got it, friends. They're all saying it, the traditional view, because that's how the verse reads. Darkness covered the deep waters, for the waters covered everything. And you prove it by Psalms 104 verse 6. Thou coverest it with the deep, as with a garment. The waters stood above the mountains. Why would you leave this verse out of your line upon line study? Why would you not deal with it? I know you may want to put a spin on it and change it because it doesn't suit your theology, but it destroys the summary theory, destroys it. If you're open-minded, if you want to put God first in your life, you've got to put the truth first. You want to run with friends, you don't want to put God first? Friends, you've got a problem. I hope you don't do that for your sake. Again, we've got the illustration of the first day. The waters covered everything. This fellow here, John Sailhamer, who argues convincingly against the view that Genesis 1:1 is a title for the whole chapter, provides three compelling arguments. I went and read them. They're quite long, too long to put in a sermon. But go and read them. There's a link. Go and read them. See what this man says. In the original, these are his conclusions. In the original, the first verse is a complete sentence. In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. It's a complete sentence. It's not a title or summary. It's not written as a title or summary. That makes a statement. What's a statement? That God created heaven and earth at a time which is called in the beginning. But titles are not formed that way in Hebrew. The conjunction and at the beginning of the second verse makes it highly unlikely that Genesis 1:1 is a title. Genesis 1 has a summary title at its conclusion. You can use verse 31 to some degree, but Genesis 2, verse 1 to 4, it's a summary, all right. Thus, the heavens and the earth were made, making it unlikely that it would have another at its beginning. Thus, Genesis 1:1 does not fit the requirement for being a title or a summary of the first creation narrative. This is sensible, common sense, intelligent reasoning without changing the scripture. These are my words, so you can take them or leave them. But does the Sabbath memorial pertain to a confused creation? We, as flat earthers, no one can understand better the issue of creation better than us, because we know that the whole world believes in a globe. We know that. We know how important it is. The Sabbath rest and the Sabbath truth hangs as a memorial of the 6 days prior to it. Would God give us those 6 days in confusion when the Sabbath is so important? People are going to be lost and saved because of their acceptance or rejection of that truth at the end of time. The Sabbath is imperatively important. And when we provide and prove to the people what that Sabbath represents, we've got to have Genesis 1:1 right. Is Genesis 1 literal, yes or no? Here's a really fair question, friends. One of the greatest truths that came out of Genesis 1:1 and the flat earth truth was the fact that we've got to take Genesis 1 literally. For me, that was just mind-blowing. I already knew that we had to take the Bible literally unless a figure or symbol is employed. That's an inspired statement. So if we're not talking prophecy and symbols, then whatever you're reading, you take it literally. So if we take Genesis 1:1 literally, is it making a statement or is it a title? It says, in the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. It's not a summary by the way it's constructed. It's not talking about a summary. It's talking about a literal event. It's a complete sentence, an act of God. Then God started his creation of this world at the very beginning of the first day. The word and in verse 2 is a conjunction. We've already looked at that, but don't underestimate the importance of this truth. If verse 1 is a summary, where did the matter for earth come from? It wasn't day 3. I know they're going to try and argue that, but forget that, friends. I'm going to show you conclusively. It's not day 3. That's when the earth appeared. It's not when it was created. So where did the matter for the earth come from if it wasn't created on day 3? And when did it come? When? Because you've only got 2 days before it, day 1 and day 2. And the only day that talks about creating heaven and earth is day 1. It's the only one. You're constrained to go that way. You actually have no option. The Lord's not leaving that open, and he's not leaving it ambiguously. And that's why the messenger of the Lord says that God gives the productions of his work at the close of each literal day. The traditional interpretation is another commentary here. Friends, when I share these summary or these comments, not because I want you to accept them as truth because some man said, no. I'm always appealing to people. I do this with the spirit of prophecy. I'm appealing to you to look at the reasoning, the arguments. When you look at 2 arguments, one for and one against, it shouldn't be that difficult to work out who's telling the truth. Because the truth, you can't do anything against the truth. You see, it stands on its own. But error will always have holes in it. There'll be mathematics in error that do not add up. They just don't add up. That's what you look for, those principles. And that's how you can come to a right conclusion. The summary theory for Genesis 1:1, suggesting it's a summary of the creation events in Genesis 1:3 and 2:3, is a relatively modern interpretation, gaining traction in the 20th and 21st centuries, particularly within certain theological and biblical study circles. Remember we saw the dates for this, the early to mid 1800s, 1844, the time of the Great Disappointment. This was taking full swing through that fellow called George Bush. For centuries, Genesis 1:1 was understood as the beginning of the creation narrative, with God creating the heavens and the earth out of nothing. This doctrine of God creating heaven and earth out of nothing is called Creator ex nihilo. It's a Latin title they've given it, and it was a much needed doctrine in that era. Geneva Bible came out, and then again in the 1800s. Why? Because a new theology is teaching you that there was matter prior to or in unison with God himself. What that doctrine teaches is there was matter prior to God. This is how you bring in evolution, you see. You take God out of the picture. Now I want to talk to you about this doctrine. This is really important. The doctrine of creation out of nothing, I'll use the English term so we don't get confused. The doctrine of creation out of nothing will affect every single doctrine about nature, humanity, sin, salvation, the work of the Holy Spirit, the nature and mission of the church, eschatology, that's end-time events. This is because accepting or rejecting creation out of nothing affects the nature of God. How does it do that? I'll show you. And the nature of God affects every single doctrine about all things, studied by theology in relation to God. Without the doctrine of creation out of nothing, we do not even have an actual doctrine of creation, at least not in the sense meant by historic Christian orthodoxy. This all things, friends, one of our favourite Godhead verses mentioned this, 1 Corinthians 8:6. It tells us that unto us there is but one God, the one true God. And it's all things. It says, of whom are all things, God. This is why the doctrine of creation out of nothing had to be developed, to prove that nothing exists outside of God. God created all things. Now, I know that as I present this, those who want to hold to a summary theory, they're going to say in their minds, we believe God created everything. What are you talking about? Is my argument irrelevant? I'll show you how irrelevant it is, friends. Let me finish this. Genesis 1:1 is a pillar for creation out of nothing. No verse is more central to the overall doctrine of creation out of nothing than Genesis 1:1. This is why it's important. And consequently, few doctrines are more central to the theology of God. Without any explanation of the origin of the elements in Genesis 1:2, the summary statement interpretation leaves the Genesis 1 narrative wide open to a theological reading in which eternal matter coexists with the eternal God prior to creation. Brown aptly states. Understand this, friends. Look, your doctrine that you're teaching, the summary, you don't have an answer for the creation of the earth. When? When I ask you when was the earth created? You don't have an answer. You may try and twist verse day 3. You may try that, but that's not going to work. And theologians are going to have a field day with your doctrine of summary theory because they know that there's nowhere else in Genesis 1 where we're told the earth was created. There is nowhere else. It was only day 1. That's the only verse. I challenge you to show me another verse in the Bible that tells you when the earth was created. Show me. When? I'm asking a question, when? Not if God created it, but when. So the summary proponents think, oh no, well we know God created everything in 6 days, we're right. Let me tell you where the danger is, friends. What you say, and even what you believe, I even accept that you believe that. But what you say and what you believe is not what you're teaching. This fellow put it so well. You notice what he says here? The summary statement interpretation leaves the Genesis 1 narrative wide open, the narrative, right, wide open to a theological reading in which eternal matter coexists with eternal God. Why? Because you don't have an answer for the creation of the earth. Yeah, let me explain it to you this way. It's really simple. A brother that worked with us for many years, we split over original sin. When Bill had finally received light on proving that their teaching nature is sin, which is what that doctrine teaches, and charged them with that, this brother gets up to preach a sermon to his congregation, new ministry. And at the beginning of his sermon, the first words he says is, I want everyone to understand that I do not believe nature is sin. And he repeats it. So I want you all to understand, I do not believe nature is sin. Okay? He made it absolutely clear. And he preaches for 1 hour. You know what he teaches in that 1 hour, friends? He teaches it so well. Nature is sin. That's what he taught. So what you say and what you believe has no bearing upon what you teach. And that's why the summary theory proponents have to be really careful. This is dangerous territory. When you leave yourself wide open, and theologians who are much smarter, much better preachers, much more educated than you, they come along, they'll destroy your doctrine. They'll make you look silly, friends. They'll have a field day with what you're teaching because you've just left yourself open. We have to give an answer for the faith that we have. We have to show ourselves approved unto God. And how are you going to convince others if you're leaving yourself open that way? More than simply the study of sentence structure and word order, precision is at stake. There are also deep-seated theological conflicts over the way in which God is to be viewed in relation to the cosmos. God is sovereign over all, over all. So you need to state it clearly and you need to show it. You need to prove it. That God did create everything and he gave you the day that he did it. The whole account is in Genesis chapter 1. You can't get it wrong if you just take it as it reads. Once this centerpiece verse has been removed, the foundation for the doctrine of creation out of nothing erodes quickly, and opposing scholars are free to reinterpret other creation passages in light of this erosion. Now, it's not only dangerous, now it becomes even worse, friends, because you're leaving it open for other theologians to play games with. Other people are going to accept that. The confusion increases, and more people are led astray. I don't know how that affects you, friends, but for over 20 years, we've been building up what we believe to be the truth about God. We've been building. When this type of doctrine comes into our circles, the reason we will stand boldly against it and confidently, not only because we have truth, not only because of that reason, but because of the damage we can see it'll do to other souls. We're trying to save souls, and these doctrines are destroying and tearing down the truth. This is not a situation you want to put yourself in. So you want to consider these points that we're sharing today very, very carefully. For numerous centuries, a traditional interpretation of Genesis 1:1 has led Christian and Jewish scholars to conclude that God created the world out of nothing. According to this tradition, Genesis 1:1 introduces God's first creative act. Genesis 1:2 then describes this initial creation as being in an incomplete state. There's another definition for tohu and bohu. As I said, I've got more to share on this. But you see, these people are just taking the Bible as it reads. They're not changing anything. Genesis 1:2 describes this initial creation as being in an incomplete state, but it was there. The rest of the Genesis narrative then describes how God shaped, moulded, and added to it. The narrative then culminates in Genesis 2:1-3. That's your summary. With God's consummation of the complete and ordered universe. Now it was ordered, like I explained to you, as a builder or a tradesman works. Since Genesis 1:1 does not describe anything as being in existence before the initial creation, other than God himself, look at this, interpreters logically conclude that God created the world from nothing. And that's exactly what the verse says. Although it is not explicitly stated, the doctrine of creation out of nothing is then an inherent theological reading of Genesis 1 narrative. Look at this, friends. This is where common sense comes into it. This is the logical and theological conclusion of what is known as a traditional interpretation of Genesis 1:1. However, within this last century or so, this traditional interpretation of Genesis 1:1 has been rigorously questioned. Why? Who is the only being that really knows where this new world order is going, friends? Who is it? Satan. And when he brings about his one world religion, you think that's going to include God as creator? Do you think that? No way, friends. No way in the world. He's opposed to all that. Satan wanted to be a creator. He wants God out of the way more than anyone. And that's what the one world religion is going to teach you. That's why you see the papal system bringing in theistic evolution. They're eroding the truth of creation big time. And we as flat earthers should have nothing to do with that, nothing. One of the strongest evidences favouring semantic continuity, which is the study of meaning in language, between Genesis 1:1 and 1:2. This is where I said to you, I wanted to share with you the importance of the word and between Genesis 1 and 2, is the two occurrences of the Hebrew word, and the word that's written there in Hebrew, if you look on the bottom of the screen, you'll notice that word's in red. That word is and the earth. Notice it's repeated twice. That's Genesis chapter 1, verse 1, and the beginning of verse 2. In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth was without form and void. He created it. He created the heaven and the earth was without form and void, the description of it. And look what this fellow says. The two identical words literally occur back to back in the text. Such close proximity between these two words strongly suggests that they correspond to one another. I mean, that's easy to see. Such a correspondence then suggests that the two verses share a semantic continuity between one another. Of course they do. One's describing the other. We saw in our reading of the passage backwards. You asked the question when? When was the earth without form and void? In the beginning, when God created the heaven and the earth. This is the plainest and simplest reading of the text. However, even though there is a proximal correspondence between the two identical words, proponents of the summary statement interpretation argue that "and the earth" in Genesis 1:1 and the earth in Genesis 1:2 do not and cannot correspond to one another. This is where I talk about honesty and integrity and intelligence, friends. There's no way you can come to that conclusion from those two verses. There's no way. You have an agenda, you have a reason, a purpose for changing that, because that's exactly what the verse is saying. Based on the preceding analysis, summary statement proponents cannot argue that it is impossible for "and the earth" of Genesis 1:1 to correspond to "and the earth" of Genesis 1:2 in meaning, simply because the former occurs in compound. That is, it's repeated, it's doubled, it's done over again. Again, the close proximity of the two identical words strongly suggests that they do correspond to one another in meaning, just as they do in other similar verses. This is common sense reasoning, friends. You don't have to be a theologian to understand that. One point a dear brother shared with me just this morning, Job 26:7, we were told that the Lord stretches out the north over the empty place and hangeth the earth upon nothing. See this word "nothing", the Hebrew word 1099, Bel Ima. This is the Hebrew word. Look at what it means. Nothing. Nothing whatsoever. Nothing whatever. Nothing. You can do an exhaustive study on this word very quickly. We just did it because it only appears once in the whole Bible, once. If God wanted to make a point of Genesis 1:1 meaning nothing, why didn't he use this word? Why did no Bible translator of the reputable Bibles, why didn't they use this word? It's not the word in the Aramaic or in the Hebrew, which Genesis 1:1 is written in Hebrew. It's not the word. This is the word that means nothing, not tohu and bohu. Look at this, and this is A.T. Jones. When the heavens and the earth had been created by the Lord, looks like he was on the right track, asking the right question, the earth was yet empty, formless, a fruitless mass. Fruitless, see? It, friends, the word "it," does it pertain to nothing? Can you say nothing is an "it"? It means something. When you say "it," you're referring to something or someone. It was without form and void. And it was necessary that the Spirit of God should come upon it and brood over it to bring it into form according to the purpose of God, and to fill it with fruitfulness and beauty to the glory of God. What he's expressing here, this "it" is something. It is something. And he says, when it was created at first, it was empty, formless, and fruitless mass. But then when God brought it to be, when he brought it forth, it was fruitful and beautiful when he finished working on it. This is the end of the 6 days. What is the meaning of the term bottomless pit? Now I just want you to know, friends, this fellow here, John Harvey Wagner, this was Elliot Wagner's father. He was one of the original pioneers of the Seventh-day Adventist movement. This guy lived and died in the faith. This guy would be known as a heavyweight. If you look at some of his studies and the things he proclaimed, just beautiful and strong. This man knew what he was talking about. He was truly led by God in his work. No wonder he had such a brilliant son. God rewarded him. What is the meaning of the term bottomless pit? Look at the point this brings out. I thank another brother for this point. The idea commonly attached to it is that of an eternally burning hell. But this is not the Bible meaning of the term. Its primary significance is a dark place, a waste, a wilderness, an uninhabited region. The original word abusos, which in Revelation 21-3 is rendered bottomless pit, is in other places rendered deep. Interesting, huh? Bottomless pit is rendered deep. Genesis chapter 1. Thus, Genesis 1:1 and 2, in the beginning God created the heaven and the earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep, or on the face of the bottomless pit. The word is literally the abyss, as given by the American Bible Union. Thus, Revelation 21-3, and I saw another angel come down from heaven having the keys of the abyss. This compared with Genesis 1:2, darkness was upon the face of the deep. The abyss or the bottomless pit locates this place very definitely. It is the face of this earth in its dark, void, chaotic state. In case you missed it, friends, Wagner's telling you the bottomless pit, which is the earth, the face of the earth, the deep, the water, is the same as what it was in Genesis 1:2. The same or close to it. Then, if in the future Satan is to be cast into the deep or abyss, this earth must be reduced back to its original chaotic state. That's how Charles Spurgeon used the same words. So that it shall be without form and void. Without form and void is referring to something, it's called it. And darkness upon the face of the deep. Will this ever be? Here's a good question. Will the earth ever be brought back to its original condition in the beginning? Look at what he says. Listen to Jeremiah. Now there's good sound counsel from a man who knows his stuff. Listen to Jeremiah. Let me ask you something, friends. Do you think Jeremiah understood Hebrew and Aramaic? We're talking about all these, English commentators today, how they saw it. We're talking about how we can understand the Hebrew. We do line upon line studies and exhaust the word throughout the Bible, and we still get it wrong. Jeremiah didn't. Jeremiah knew the language. He knew it very well. Look at what Jeremiah says. I beheld the earth, and know it was without form. It was without form and void. And the heavens, and they had no light. And compare this with Genesis 1:2. The earth was without form and void, and darkness was on the face of it. Was Jeremiah seeing something? Isn't this a vision? He beheld. Are we going to change the meaning of beheld now? What does beheld mean? He saw it. Whether it's in real life or in vision, beholding means you see something. Listen to Jeremiah, who had a vision of the future condition of it. So it's in vision. I beheld the earth, and know it was without form and void, and the heavens, and they had no light. So when we compare it with Genesis 1:2, the earth was without form and void, darkness was upon the face of the deep, then the time is coming when this earth will be reduced back to its original condition. But he continues, I beheld, again he saw, the mountains, and lo, they trembled. Imagine that, the mountains. At the end of time will be similar in some way, like they were at the beginning. They trembled, and all the hills moved lightly. I beheld, and lo, there was no man, and all the birds in the heavens fled. I beheld, and lo, the fruitful place was become a wilderness, and all the cities thereof were broken down at the presence of the Lord by his fierce anger, for thus have the Lord said. So when he beheld all these things, all of this, the earth trembling, the hills moving, the mountains, what was he seeing something, yes or no? Because it's the same word he uses for when he beheld the earth was without form and void. It's the same reasoning. You can't change it. The prophet plainly declares that all the earth will be desolate of its inhabitants. That's what it's desolate of. And turned into a wilderness, so to remain for a period of 1,000 years. We know that that's going to be the case. Satan's going to be on this earth for 1,000 years without any people to tempt. He'll have all his evil angels around him. They're already gone and lost. In no sense trying to tempt them. There'll be chaos between them, no doubt. Remember that it was a place similar to this, into which the scapegoat was turned. And those of you who understand the sanctuary would know that at the end of the Day of Atonement, this is exactly what happened. The wilderness was described as a land not inhabited. But tell me something, friends. So when the scapegoat was released on the Day of Atonement, was he still on earth? Was there still land mass? Was there something? Yes, there was. There wasn't. The earth didn't disappear. Scapegoat went into the wilderness, a barren, desolate place. Uninhabited is the correct word. Look at what he says. This is the place where Satan, the great antitypical scapegoat, is to be bound 1,000 years. The prophet continues, and I saw an angel come down from heaven, having the key of the bottomless pit, the abyss, and a great chain in his hand. And he laid hold on the dragon, the old serpent, which is the devil. And Satan bound him 1,000 years and cast him into the bottomless pit and shut him up and set a seal upon him, that he should deceive the nations no more, till the 1,000 years should be fulfilled. Look at this. Thus we see that just as soon as the earth is made a wilderness, it's still there, but it's a wilderness, Satan is cast into this desolate region. It's still there, friends. And that's a depiction, it's a representation of how the earth was in the beginning, to remain there 1,000 years. Now, if anyone has any doubts of J.H. Wagner's reasoning, I don't. Of Jeremiah, and if Jeremiah's not enough, here's another messenger of the Lord, friends. Look at what she says. That the expression bottomless pit represents the earth in a state of confusion and darkness is evident from other scriptures. Concerning the condition of the earth in the beginning, now listen really, really carefully to this, right? Because there's only one slide left after this. And this is the punchline. Concerning the condition of the earth in the beginning, the Bible record says that it was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep. These next words in capital letters is the Ellen White estate, just clearing up a point to make sure that we don't get it wrong. They're not Ellen White's words. I just want to point it out to you, just so you know. Genesis 1:2, the word here translated deep, is the same that in Revelation 21:3 is rendered bottomless pit. That's exactly what Wagner saw, exactly the same. Now watch what she says. Prophecy teaches that it will be brought back partially at least to this condition. She's comparing the state of the earth at the end of time with how it was in the beginning, desolate. Now you can start to understand the best reasoning and understanding we can have of formless and void, tohu and bohu in the Hebrew. Looking forward to that great day of God, the prophet Jeremiah, and she's quoting him, the prophet Jeremiah declares, I beheld the earth and lo, it was without form and void, and the heavens, and they had no light. I beheld the mountains and lo, they trembled. The hills moved lightly. He's seeing it all, friends. We've just read it. Lo, the fruitful place was a wilderness, and all the cities thereof were broken down. They were there broken down. The disorder of tohu and bohu, of formless and void, before the Lord put it all together. That's why I like those translations which said prepared or unordered. That's how it was. That's how the Lord created it on day one. That's the Bible record. Now, friends, if some of the points I've shared today haven't convinced you yet, then I don't know what else I can say. But this last slide, what I want to do, I want to show you how much against this teaching of Jeremiah chapter 4, the prophet and all the heavyweights place Genesis 1:1. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to quote the very sentiments of the people that brought this heresy into our ranks and have convinced a number of people of this heresy because they never saw the straw man at the beginning. And in the chat, I'm going to show it to you. The straw man was there. That's what he proved. He didn't prove the truth. The brother says, in the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. Genesis 1:1 denotes the 6 days. This brother's reasoning is that in the beginning is 6 days. Remember the illustrations I shared with you about the races? In the beginning. Remember what George Lamsa says? In the very beginning. That God created the firmament and the dry land. Why does he say firmament? Why doesn't he use the Bible terms? The heaven or the heavens. In the beginning, the firmament was not called the heavens. The heavens were there, not the firmament as such. He says the firmament and the dry land. This is a question he is going to have to answer. Implying also the seas and all that fills these environments. Now it gets worse. The next line starts a narrative proper. It describes a stage that's not yet set. So he's saying verse 2, he's going to quote it now. Verse 2 is where the creation begins. And the earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep. And the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters, Genesis 1:2. And this is what his understanding of that is. This is the start of the clock of the account of the creation of our world. This is the start of the clock, is it? Started with the word and. Started with the word and. It didn't start with in the beginning. No. You can't use in the beginning for a beginning, can you? Huh? What sort of reasoning is this? This is the start of the clock of the account of creation of our world. God's presence upon this dark environment is the start of the evening of day one. And the earth is described as not yet formed. That's okay, not yet formed, like formless. I can accept that. But look at the leap, friends. Look at the leap. Look at the straw man. He goes from not yet formed, that's formless and void, that's tohu and bohu in Hebrew. He goes from that to, or as not yet created. There's your straw man, friends. As not yet created. The earth is void and missing from the scene. Friends, listen carefully. The straw man's exposed. You can accept or reject it. It makes no difference to me. But understand this. There's a dozen different adjectives you can use for formless and void. At the end of the day, this is so controversial that the very, very best Hebrew linguists, they tell you, and I've got the evidence for it, I can show it to you, they tell you that they still don't know the exact meaning of tohu and bohu. These are the guys that study it all their lives. That's them. Now that says something, because there's obviously something in those words that we're missing. And without the Aramaic dialect, you won't get it. That's why I share with you the principle of understanding dialects. The reason it's important is this. If you're going to build a case on a word, and this is a principle verse that they're using to show that the earth did not exist, it wasn't created yet. If you're going to build a case on this word, you better find something else. Because the best Hebrew linguists tell you they can't get to the bottom of it. And you've got a dozen other choices that you can make, and you want to pick this one? Of all the words you want to pick this one? That's the biggest straw man I've ever seen in theology. That's the biggest. Nothing tops it. And the brother's good at what he does, because the rest of his study, 66 pages, he goes and proves that the tohu and bohu means not created. He proves it because of his reasoning, but not because it's truth. It's definitely not true. I'll stand by this till the day I die. So I hope that says something to you. And we'll close in prayer now and open up questions and answer time. And you're free to share whatever you want. Let's kneel in prayer. Dear loving Father in heaven, in Jesus' name we pray, and we want to thank you, Lord, that your word is clear. There is no reason for this to be a controversy. It is not an issue in the minds of those who can take thy word as it reads. And we thank you for the conviction that you bring to support the truth in such a way that there can be no contradictions, Lord, no ambiguity. We thank you that you've made this not only easy to understand, Lord, but a child could understand it when it's explained correctly. We pray and ask that you'll bless the talk that follows and let thy truth shine even brighter with any debate that might appear. We thank you for this, and we pray this prayer in Jesus' precious name. Amen.